Right now, though, obviously with the college football playoff rankings coming up, we are going to try and see if the man himself can call his shot. Lee, do we know how Brady did last week as far as his predictions and the actual college football playoff rankings? I'm going to go at least 10 out of 12. I think you went 10 out of 12. That's going to be my guess for last week. But it is time for week 2. A lot of teams near the top have lost. And let's take a look. Let's take a listen to see if BQ can do it again.
Well, first off, let me just begin by saying this. I want to reiterate, and I'm going to do this almost every single week. The top 12 teams are not necessarily who get into the college football playoff. I need to say this because as we get closer and closer to the end, there's all types of scenarios that can play out. I talked to you guys yesterday about the Big 12. The Big 12 conference is the most fascinating conference in all of college football. There's a lot of parity. There's a lot of teams that could win it. BYU right now is the highest ranked currently in the college football playoff poll. However, there's a chance Colorado, who controls their own destiny, if they win out, they would be playing BYU and they would go. In that instance, if Colorado was to beat an undefeated BYU, Colorado would be assured a spot into the college football playoff. Now, whether or not they would get a bye, we would have to wait and see. However, they would be assured of a spot being a part of one of the Power 4 conferences. The question then becomes, if BYU is 12-1 and that is their one loss, are they going to get penalized for it? We will soon find out. This week's ratings will give us a bit more of a sense, but I don't think there's going to be much changes this week outside of a few in regards to the teams that are in the mix. It'll be more about the seeding, and I'll get to that in a second. Oregon will remain at number 1. Ohio State at number 2. No reason to change either of those two. The big changes really come at 3 and 4. Texas, with the loss by Georgia this past week, now with their season on decline. Maybe you're saying, does Georgia get left out of the playoff altogether? They got to play Tennessee this week. Does the SEC schedule beat them up enough to a point where they're not even a part of the conversation? But Texas bumps up to number 3. They would be the number 2 seed if the playoff was to start today, representing the SEC if they were to win the SEC championship. At number 4, I've got Penn State. I think they will be solidified in that spot. However, as you see, 3 of the top 4 teams, Big Ten teams, it would be Oregon who actually gets the bye at the number 1 overall seed. Ohio State then would be the next highest seed at number 5, and then Penn State subsequently after that. After Penn State, I've got Tennessee at 5. We'll see what they could do this week. Obviously, that would be a huge win. Who knows how high they would jump if they could beat Georgia. Behind Tennessee, I've got Indiana, who's undefeated, 10-0, riding high into the bye week with Ohio State on the other side. However, their strength of schedule has been rather easy up until they play Ohio State next week. One little nugget, though, that I think is pretty fascinating. When's the last team that went 10-0 the next season and beat the 2 teams that were playing for the national championship the year prior? They beat Michigan. They beat Washington. People tend to forget that was who actually was playing off for the national championship. Kind of weird question, but I'd be curious to see if that's ever happened before in college football. At number 7, Notre Dame, who's been flying high ever since the loss to Northern Illinois. I know a lot of Notre Dame fans want them to forget about it. I think that team's starting to make people forget about it with the way they're drumming their opponents. The over-under, all right, for team total points for Florida State was 7.5. They gave up 3 last week. It was a ridiculously dominant performance by Notre Dame. At number 8, I've got BYU, still undefeated. Some people are going to say they needed some help from the Big 12 officials. That's up to you to decide. Regardless, they're undefeated. They beat Utah in the Holy War, and they've got their eyes set on the Big 12 championship game. Remember, they could drop one game and still have a clear path to the Big 12 championship. So it really comes down to them winning once more, and it's pretty much in the bag for them for the most part. At number 9, I've got Alabama. Nice win over LSU this past week. It was an elimination game. LSU out. Alabama still in the mix. Same could be said for Ole Miss. Huge win over Georgia. Arguably the biggest win in Lane Kiffin's career as a head coach. Ole Miss is very much the mix. I've got Georgia at 11. No room for error here. We talked about their matchup versus Tennessee. Tennessee. They've got to find a way to get things back on track. The offensive line play has been poor. Carson Beck's been throwing the ball into trouble too much, and there's no playmakers helping out on the outside. They've got some injuries there. Maybe they get healthier this week. And at number 12, rounding it out, I've got Miami. After their loss this past week, they've been playing with fire all year long. It finally caught up to them. Still, though, if things play out and they win out, as well as Clemson, Miami would actually have the go-ahead to go represent, I shouldn't say represent, they don't have divisions anymore, but they would be the second team that would play in the ACC Championship game against SMU right now. Yes, SMU, even though they're in the leader spot in the ACC, I still have Miami ahead of them. I just think Cam Ward's a difference maker. But the differentiator is Louisville. Miami beat Louisville. Clemson lost to Louisville. If both Clemson and Miami went out, Miami would go instead. Just outside the top 12, we got Boise State at 13, SMU at 14, and Texas A&M rounding out the top 15.
What I'm talking about right there. What I'm talking about.
What's wrong with you, man? Like, do you not have time in your life? Like, what?
I travel a lot, so I get the opportunity to kind of geek out and just look at a bunch of stuff and stats. But, dude, here's the thing is, when I said that Michigan and Washington played for the national championship last year, how many of y'all remember that?
I remember.
I remember.
Yeah, I remember.
Because that was any naysayers on Michael Penix, they were pointing to that game as being like, oh, yeah. I feel like that's gotten lost in the mix because neither of those teams have been competitive. Granted, a bunch of changes, both head coaches gone and new quarterbacks and all that too. But the reality is, it's just crazy to think about a year ago. If I would have said to you guys, "Hey, Indiana's going to be 10-0, and they're going to have a really good shot at playing as part of the college football playoff," you guys would have been like, "What are you talking about, dude? No chance. Like, they're going to beat both teams who are playing for a national championship." It's been pretty wild in Bloomington for Coach Kirk Cincinnati and the Hoosiers and the way they played. By the way, I know I talked about how easy their schedule has been this year, and it cranks up, obviously, versus Ohio State. But the truth is, they've dominated their opponents. Like, when you really look at like some of the comparable opponents that they played against, and a couple of them I was like looking at, okay, how much did Penn State, who just drummed Washington at home, Indiana beat them by a couple of touchdowns too, though. Like, it's not like they have had a hard time with any of these opponents. They have crushed everyone. Even Michigan, that game was a little bit tight, which I kind of felt like it might be with the bye ahead and Ohio State 2 weeks ahead, but got by Michigan. So here we are with a 10-0 Indiana team that's ranked inside the top 10, the best start in their history of their university. It's pretty cool.
I hope they finish it out, too.
I do, too, just for, the committee's sake, because, I'm tired of them pissing Joel Klatt off, man. I'm just sick of this. Indiana deserves some respect.
Klatt, nobody else got nothing on cue, bro. No. I ain't never heard nobody run S like that.
Yeah.
If I didn't know you, if I didn't know you and love you as a little bro, I'd talk so bad about you, man. Cause
I appreciate that.
It's too smart. It's too much.
I wouldn't.
It's too much for me.
I wouldn't.
It's so good. It's so good.
I think it's a great job. I think you do a fine work.
I mean, I don't get it. I don't know how you know
Here's my
so
question
much.
to you guys, not to continue to kind of geek out about this, but
Come on, geek out.
If you look at,
Let's keep geeking.
If you look at, for example, Ohio State's schedule as compared to Oregon, Penn State, Indiana. All right, Ohio State had to play
Not
Oregon,
hard. Yeah.
had to play Penn State, have to play Indiana. Those other three schools, Oregon didn't play Penn State, they don't play Indiana. Penn State only played Ohio State, not Oregon.
No.
Or Indiana.
Or Michigan.
Indiana, or Michigan, even though
they're not that good. Yeah.
Right. And then Indiana only got Ohio State. I guess I'll put it this way. I'll be open about this. If you're the Big Ten and you want to try to stack the deck so you get at least 3 teams in, this will be the way you schedule moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
You will take 3 or 4 of the top teams, and you will essentially have, unless they've got a tough non-conference opponent, they're only going to have one big boy within the conference if you can schedule it out that way. And I know people are going to hate me saying that, but this is about money. The more teams into the college football playoff, the more money the conference gets out of it, the teams get out of it. So there's a bit of an incentive here to do so. And I think the tough thing for the SEC is, if we're being real, I think they've got 5 teams that are all legit and contending with one another, and Georgia's facing it because they've had to play a ridiculous schedule, as has Alabama. If you look at the Big Ten, the way that's scheduled out, no one knew IU was going to be like this. But for Oregon and Penn State, I mean, only to play Ohio State, not really to have any other big boys. I mean, Penn State wouldn't have had Michigan this year anyway. It's kind of crazy to think that's the case.
That's the part that I find so entertaining is I know people don't like, well, the business element of it, but the part that's funny to me is that there are going to be conferences, Big Ten, SEC, who are looking at this year going, all right, let's just see how this plays out. And then they'll reevaluate in the offseason and go, yeah, so this is how we're going to do it to get all our teams.
You're not reevaluating. You're redoing.
So basically, this is like if you're going to get randos into the college football playoffs.
Because
so
y'all knocking each other off.
This would be the year to do it before the Big Ten and the SEC get their hands on it and go, we're just going to turn this into a
But if I'm in the SEC or the Big Ten, I'm looking at it like I'm going to schedule so we can get as many in as we can. I mean, it's simple math.
Funny, it's pretty funny.
Like, you look at what's going on in the SEC, that's bad right now, man.
Yeah.
It's carnage.
I mean, it's going to create some controversy, too, because you're going to have a number of 2-loss teams and probably a 3-loss team. I mean, get ready for it right now. There's going to be a world where a 3-loss team gets in. And I've had these conversations, with Coach Meyer, in part because he coached in the Big Ten, he coached in the SEC, and his comments always like, well, how do you compare an ACC schedule, a Big 12 schedule, and with a team that's lost 3 games in the SEC? He's like, it's kind of apples and oranges. It's just a different level of competition. Now, there's validity to that, but that's also not the construct of the playoff that we agreed to. So unless something changes in the future, this is what we agreed to. And I don't think it's fair to the players and teams, the Big 12 ACC, if we all went in this agreement, eyes wide open, and now we're saying, well, the SEC, maybe we should get a team or 2 here because it's Georgia or because it's Alabama and they've got 3 losses. That's not how this works, man. That's just not how this works. This happens in the NCAA March Madness basketball tournament sometimes. You get some of those blue bloods that have a down year. They're not as highly ranked. Maybe they miss out a little bit. It's just, I think that's where we're getting to, and people are going to have to adjust and get more comfortable with that.